It was just another Thursday at the SpaceX headquarters, or so everyone thought. The hum of computers and the quiet chatter of engineers filled the air as they worked on the next breakthrough that would change humanity's future. In the corner office, a young boy sat quietly, his curious eyes taking in everything around him. This wasn't just any child. This was XAEX-12, Elon Musk's son, though most people simply called him X. At just 5 years old, X had already spent more time around rocket scientists and tech visionaries than most people do in a lifetime. But today was different. Today, the building had an unusual energy, a palpable buzz of anticipation. The former President of the United States, Donald Trump, was coming to tour the facility. You see, despite their public differences over the years, Elon Musk and Donald Trump had found common ground in their visions for American innovation and space exploration. This visit wasn't about politics, it was about the future. X fidgeted in his chair, straightening his small custom SpaceX jacket. He had heard stories about this man his father sometimes talked about on phone calls late at night. This man who had once been the most powerful person in the world. A man who, like his father, was no stranger to controversy, bold visions, and against all odds success. "Dad, is he really coming here?" X asked, his voice barely audible above the increasing commotion as security personnel began to position themselves throughout the building. Elon smiled at his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Yes, and you know what? I think you might like him. He's different. Like us." X nodded solemnly, processing this information with the unusual thoughtfulness that often surprised those around him. The boy had inherited his father's analytical mind, an insatiable curiosity. But there was something else there too, a softness, an emotional intelligence that sometimes seemed beyond his years. The moment arrived with the characteristic flurry that accompanied Donald Trump wherever he went. Security guards with earpieces, assistants with clipboards, and the unmistakable figure of the former president himself, his signature suit and tie impeccable as always. What nobody expected, least of all Elon, was what happened next. As the adults exchanged formal greetings and prepared for the official tour, X slipped away from his father's side. Something about the tall man with the distinctive hair had captured his attention in a way that few things outside of rockets and computers ever did. X approached Donald Trump with none of the hesitation or reverence that adults typically showed. Instead, there was only the pure, unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Excuse me, Mr. President," the boy said, his voice clear and surprisingly steady. The room fell silent. Donald Trump, a man accustomed to commanding attention in any space he entered, found himself looking down at this small figure with genuine surprise. Something in the boy's direct gaze reminded him of his own grandchildren, that unguarded honesty that only children possess. "Well, hello there, young man," Trump responded, his usual boisterous tone softening just a bit. "You must be Elon's boy. What's your name?" "I'm X," the boy replied simply. Then, without preamble or filter, he asked the question that would change the entire nature of the visit. "Can I ask you something? My dad is successful. You're successful too. What's your secret?" The room held its collective breath. The innocence of the question, delivered with such earnestness, caught everyone off guard. This wasn't on the agenda. This wasn't part of the carefully choreographed meeting between two of America's most powerful figures. This was a child asking the question that perhaps adults had become too cynical or too cautious to ask so directly. Donald Trump looked at the boy for a long moment. Those who knew him well could see something shift in his expression. The public persona, the businessman, the politician, the larger-than-life character that dominated headlines, seemed to recede slightly. In its place was something more genuine, more reflective. He knelt down, something most people had rarely seen him do, bringing himself to eye level with X. "That's quite a question, young man," Trump said, his voice carrying easily in the silent room. "Your father and I might disagree on many things, but we both understand what it takes to build something lasting in this world." X waited, his eyes never leaving Trump's face. The former president seemed to be considering his words carefully, not for the press or for the adults in the room, but for this one child who had asked him perhaps the most important question of all. Little did anyone know that what would follow would not be the standard talking points about hard work and determination. Instead, Donald Trump was about to share a deeply personal perspective on success that would leave everyone in the room, hardened business executives, brilliant engineers, and even Elon Musk himself, surprisingly moved. The cameras weren't rolling yet. The official tour hadn't begun. But in that unscripted moment between a curious child and a man who had lived a life in the spotlight, something authentic was about to unfold. Something that would remind everyone present about what truly matters on the journey to success. Elon Musk, with the disarming directness that only children possess, had created an opening for wisdom to flow. And Donald Trump, a man known for his confidence and bravado, was about to respond with unexpected vulnerability and insight that would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. This is the story of that moment. A moment that began with a simple question from a child and ended with powerful truths about success, failure, family, and purpose that would leave not just Elon Musk, but everyone present profoundly affected. The SpaceX facility hummed with an electric energy as two worlds collided: the innovative tech empire of Elon Musk and the business-political dynasty of Donald Trump. Engineers and executives lined the walls, smartphones discreetly capturing this unexpected moment. Security personnel exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene as the former president knelt before the young boy. Donald Trump studied X's face, seeing something familiar in those inquisitive eyes, the same hunger for knowledge he'd recognized in his own children and grandchildren. The room waited, suspended in that moment of anticipation. "Success," Trump began, his voice softer than his typical rally cadence. "People think it's about money or power or winning. And sure, those things come with it, but that's not really it." X tilted his head slightly, absorbing every word with a remarkable focus that had already made his teachers marvel. Elon moved closer, equally curious about what wisdom his former political adversary might impart to his son. "The real secret to success is something your father knows very well," Trump continued, gesturing toward Elon. "It's about never quitting when everyone else says you should. When I was building in New York, they all said I was crazy. When your dad said he was going to build reusable rockets, they laughed at him too." The former president's eyes seemed to drift momentarily, as if reviewing his own journey. "I've lost everything twice in my life. Everything. Most people don't know that. The newspapers said I was finished. But I got up the next morning and went back to work." X nodded solemnly. Even at his young age, he had absorbed enough of his father's story to understand the concept of perseverance through failure. "But here's what they don't tell you, something I wish someone had told me when I was younger," Trump said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in slightly. "Success isn't worth much if you don't have someone to share it with." A palpable shift occurred in the room. The hardened businessmen and brilliant engineers, people who had dedicated their lives to achievement and innovation, exchanged glances. This wasn't the brash, bombastic Trump from television. This was a man who had climbed to unimaginable heights and was now reflecting on what he'd found at the summit. "I've had my name on some of the biggest buildings in the world. I've been the most powerful man on the planet. But do you know when I've felt most successful?" He paused, making sure X was still with him. "When my children call me just to talk. Not because they need something, just because they want to share their day with me." Elon's expression changed subtly, something only those who knew him well would notice. For a man so focused on humanity's future, Mars colonies, neural interfaces, sustainable energy. This statement about the intimate connection between parent and child seemed to strike a chord. "Your dad is trying to save the world," Trump continued, gesturing toward Musk. "And that's important. That's noble. But I bet the moment he feels most successful is when you look at him the way you're looking at me right now, like what he says matters, like he has wisdom worth hearing." X glanced back at his father, and in that moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a shared understanding. "Success isn't just what you build," Trump said. "It's who you become while building it, and who sticks with you through it all." The former president straightened up, his knees cracking slightly as he rose to his full height. The vulnerability of the moment began to pass, but its impact lingered in the air. "I've made mistakes," Trump admitted, surprising even his own staff with this candor. "Chase the wrong thing sometimes. Put winning above wisdom. That's the thing about success. It can blind you if you're not careful. You start thinking the rules don't apply to you." He placed a gentle hand on X's shoulder. "So here's my advice, young man. Work hard like your father. Dream big like he does. But remember to look up from the workbench sometimes. The view is worth it." X nodded, processing this information with remarkable poise. "Thank you, Mr. President," he said simply. Trump smiled, the genuine warmth of it transforming his face. "You're a smart kid. Got a good head on your shoulders. You're going to do amazing things." He turned to Elon, who had been watching this exchange with uncharacteristic stillness. "You've got quite a boy here, Elon. Asks better questions than most of the reporters I've met." The tension that had existed between these two titans, one representing traditional business and political power, the other the future of technology and innovation, seemed to soften in the presence of a child's curiosity. In that moment, they were just two fathers discussing what really matters. As the official tour finally began, something had changed in the atmosphere. The engineers who had prepared technical presentations suddenly found themselves speaking more from the heart about why they had joined SpaceX, not just what they did there. Trump's questions became less about specs and more about the people behind the innovations. X stayed close to his father throughout the tour, occasionally glancing up at the former president with newfound interest. Something about Trump's words had resonated with him, perhaps the acknowledgement that success was more complicated than simply achieving goals or accumulating wealth. Later, as the entourage moved toward the rocket assembly building, a SpaceX engineer overheard X ask his father, "Dad, do you feel successful?" The question hung in the air between them, weighty with implication. Elon, never one to offer platitudes or easy answers, seemed to consider the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm still figuring that out," Elon finally replied, with uncharacteristic candor. "But today, walking through this building with you asking such thoughtful questions? Yes, in this moment I feel very successful indeed." The engineer who overheard this exchange would later tell colleagues that watching these two great American success stories, Trump and Musk, momentarily set aside their differences and reflect on what truly constitutes a life well lived was perhaps the most unexpected and valuable lesson of the day. And it had all begun with a child's simple question. As the official tour progressed through SpaceX's massive facility, the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. What was supposed to be a formal visit had transformed into something far more authentic. Donald Trump, a man who had spent decades crafting his public image, seemed to have dropped the performance. The cameras followed, but they were capturing something real, something unscripted. X stayed close to his father, but kept glancing toward Trump. The boy appeared to be processing everything the former president had shared, turning it over in his mind, like one of the complex puzzles Elon often gave him to solve. But this puzzle was different. It wasn't about engineering or mathematics. It was about life. The group reached the heart of the facility, the main production floor where starships were being assembled. Massive stainless steel components towered above them, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. Engineers paused their work, watching as these two controversial visionaries walked among the machines that might someday carry humanity to Mars. "Quite something you've built here, Elon," Trump said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "American innovation at its finest. This is what made our country great, and what will keep it great." Elon nodded in acknowledgement. "It's taken longer than I'd hoped. We've had more failures than I care to remember, but we learn from each one." "Failure," Trump repeated thoughtfully. Then, looking down at X, he said, "That's another secret of success your father and I both understand. Everyone sees the victories. Few see the defeats, but that's where the real work happens." X's eyes widened. "My dad says we learn more from explosions than from perfect launches." Trump laughed, a genuine sound that bounced off the metal walls. "Smart man, your father. In my world, the explosions just cost money. In his world, they actually explode." The tension that had existed between the two men seemed to dissolve further. Here were two individuals who, despite their differences, understood something fundamental about creation and destruction, about risking everything for a vision that others couldn't yet see. "You know," Trump continued as they paused before a massive rocket engine, "people think success is a straight line, up and up and up." He gestured with his hand. "But it's not. It's messy. It's ugly sometimes. It's waking up at 3 in the morning terrified you've made the wrong bet. It's second mortgaging everything you own because you believe in something nobody else does." Elon's expression changed subtly. This was a language he understood intimately, the language of risk, of staking everything on a vision. For all their differences in style and philosophy, there was a shared experience here that transcended politics or personal branding. "I was days from bankruptcy in 2008, Elon said quietly. "Both companies, Tesla and SpaceX. People don't realize how close we came to the edge." Trump nodded. "Atlantic City nearly sank me in the 90s. The banks were circling. Everyone wanted a piece. The newspapers had me written off." X looked between the two men, witnessing something few ever had, a moment of vulnerable connection between two of the most scrutinized figures of the modern era. "But you didn't give up," X said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "No," both men answered simultaneously, then exchanged surprised glances. "That's the whole game right there," Trump continued, kneeling again to X's level. "Success isn't about never falling. It's about getting up one more time than you fall. Your father knows this better than almost anyone I've met." A SpaceX engineer approached tentatively, holding a tablet. "Mr. Musk, we have the simulation results you were waiting for." Elon glanced at the screen, then looked at Trump. "Would you like to see something few outside this building have witnessed? The simulation of our first potential Mars landing?" Trump's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Absolutely." The group moved to a conference room where a large screen displayed a detailed simulation of a starship descending toward the red Martian surface. The room darkened and the red planet filled the screen. X sat between his father and Trump, his eyes wide with wonder. As the simulation played, showing the complex landing sequence, Trump leaned toward X. "You see that?" he whispered. "That's what success really looks like. It's not the landing. It's everything that came before it. All the failures, all the tests, all the sleepless nights. That's the part most people never see." X nodded solemnly. When the lights came back on, there was a moment of silence. The engineers looked expectantly at Trump, curious about his reaction to this glimpse of humanity's potential future. "You know," Trump said finally, "when I was a boy, we watched Neil Armstrong step on the moon. The whole country stopped to watch. We felt like Americans could do anything. We'd beaten the Russians. We'd done the impossible." He paused, looking directly at Elon. "We need that again. We need that feeling that nothing is impossible." Politics aside, what you're doing here matters. Elon, normally reserved about accepting praise, seemed genuinely moved by this assessment. Thank you, that means a lot. X, who had been quietly observing this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Mr. President, earlier you said success is about who you become while building things. Who did you become? The room fell silent again. The unexpected depth of the child's question caught everyone off guard. None more so than Trump himself. For a moment, the former president seemed at a loss for words, a rarity for a man known for his verbal confidence. He began, then stopped, collecting his thoughts. That's probably the most important question anyone has asked me in years. He looked around the room, then back at X. I became many things. Some I'm proud of, some I'm not. I became tougher, I became more skeptical, I became more determined. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. But I also became someone who sometimes forgot to look at the sunset because I was too busy building the next someone who sometimes measured friendships by what people could do for me rather than by the loyalty in their hearts. The rawness of this admission seemed to surprise even Trump's own staff. This wasn't campaign rhetoric or media training. This was something else, a moment of genuine reflection prompted by a child's disarming question. If I could tell my younger self one thing, Trump continued, it would be to remember that the buildings will outlast you, but so will the relationships you build or break along the way. Success that costs you your soul isn't success at all. X looked up at his father, then back at Trump. Thank you for telling the truth, he said simply. Something in those words, the recognition of honesty from the perspective of innocent childhood, seemed to touch everyone in the room. Even the most cynical members of the press corps found themselves affected by the unexpected vulnerability of the moment. As the tour prepared to continue, an engineer handed X a small model of a Starship rocket, a customary gift for special visitors. X looked at it thoughtfully. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including his father, he offered it to Trump. For your grandchildren, X said, so they can remember today too. Trump accepted the small rocket model with visible emotion. I'll treasure this, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. And I'll tell them about the very smart boy who asked me the questions I needed to hear. The tour continued through SpaceX's testing facilities, where prototype rockets underwent rigorous evaluation before their journeys to the launch pad. Engineers demonstrated how components were stress-tested to withstand the extreme conditions of space travel. Yet, despite the technical marvels surrounding them, many eyes kept returning to the unusual trio leading the procession. Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and young X, who now walked between the two men with a newfound confidence. This is where we break things to make them stronger, Elon explained as they observed a materials testing chamber. We push everything past its limits to find the breaking point, then engineer beyond it. Trump nodded appreciatively. Smart approach. In business, I always tell my teams to prepare for the worst-case scenario. If you're ready for disaster, success becomes much more likely. One of the younger engineers, emboldened by the increasingly candid atmosphere, spoke up. Mr. President, that's actually similar to something Mr. Musk told us during a particularly difficult development phase. He said, if things aren't failing, you're not innovating enough. Trump turned to Elon with genuine respect in his eyes. We might approach things differently, but we understand the same fundamental truths. As they moved into a quieter section of the facility, X tugged gently on Trump's sleeve. The former president immediately bent down, giving the boy his full attention, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the observers. Mr. President, X asked, his voice quiet but clear, were you ever afraid of failing? The question hung in the air, disarming in its simplicity yet profound in its implications. Trump glanced up at Elon, who watched with interest, then back to the child. Every day, Trump admitted, surprising everyone with his candor. Anyone who says they're never afraid is either lying or hasn't aimed high enough. Fear is part of the journey. The trick isn't eliminating fear, it's not letting it stop you. X considered this, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. My dad says being brave isn't about not feeling scared. It's about feeling scared, but doing the important thing anyway. Trump smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his features. Your dad is exactly right, and that's something I wish more people understood about success. Everyone sees the confidence, the achievements, the victories. Very few see the 3 a.m. doubts, the crushing setbacks, the moments when you wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. A member of Trump's staff shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to hearing their boss speak with such vulnerability. This wasn't the carefully crafted public image they worked so hard to maintain. But Trump seemed past caring about political calculation. Something about this unexpected interaction with Elon's remarkably perceptive son had broken through the usual barriers. You know, Trump continued, success often looks like certainty from the outside. People think I never doubted myself. The truth is, doubt is constant, but action has to be stronger than doubt. Elon nodded, his own guard seeming to lower further. That's why so few people achieve truly difficult things. The doubt becomes paralyzing. Most people stop when the fear gets too intense or when the early failures pile up. They never discover what might have been possible if they'd pushed through. Trump gestured toward the massive rocket components surrounding them. Like building these behemoths and expecting them to land themselves. Crazy idea. Until it works. Then it's genius, Elon added with a slight smile. Exactly, Trump agreed. The line between visionary and foolish is success. Nothing more. X looked between the two men, absorbing their exchange with remarkable focus. So success means being brave enough to look foolish. Both men turned to the boy, matching expressions of surprise on their faces. There was something profound about hearing their complex philosophies, distilled through the clarity of a child's perception. That might be the most insightful definition I've ever heard, Trump said, a new respect evident in his voice. He turned to Elon. You've got a remarkable son here. He asks better questions than most of the advisors I've had. Elon placed a hand on X's shoulder, pride visible in his usually stoic expression. He sees things differently. Always has. As they approached a window overlooking the vast expanse of the testing grounds, Trump grew contemplative. The Texas sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the launch facilities in the distance. You know, he said almost to himself, when I was first running for president, everyone said it was impossible. The political establishment, the media, even some of my closest advisors. They all said a businessman with no political experience couldn't possibly win. He paused, looking out at the horizon. But I saw something they didn't. I saw a country hungry for something different, something authentic. He turned to X. That's another secret of success. Sometimes you have to trust what you see, even when everyone else is blind to it. Your father understood that Tesla could revolutionize the auto industry when everyone said electric cars were a fantasy. He saw that reusable rockets made sense when the entire aerospace industry insisted they were impossible. X nodded solemnly. You have to believe in your vision. Exactly, Trump confirmed. But, and this is crucial, you also have to be willing to adjust that vision when reality demands it. Stubbornness isn't the same as persistence. The most successful people I know can tell the difference between an obstacle that needs to be overcome and a sign that the approach needs to change. A SpaceX executive who had been quietly observing stepped forward. That's something Mr. Musk has instilled in our culture here. We have the mission, making humanity multi-planetary, but we're constantly evolving our methods based on what the testing tells us. Trump nodded appreciatively. Smart. Very smart. He looked at Elon. You know, we've had our differences over the years, but I've always respected your willingness to speak your mind regardless of the consequences. That's rare these days. Elon acknowledged this with a slight nod. Likewise, whatever our disagreements, your resilience is undeniable. As they continued walking, X suddenly asked, Mr. President, what was your biggest mistake? A hush fell over the group. This was territory few dared to explore with the former president, whose public persona typically focused on strength and success rather than missteps or regrets. For a moment, it seemed Trump might deflect the question or offer a polished, prepared response. Instead, he slowed his pace and looked directly at X. My biggest mistake, he began, his voice quieter than before, was probably confusing wealth with worth for too many years. I measured success by the size of buildings, by dollar signs, by headlines. I chased deals sometimes when I should have been watching my children grow up. The rawness of this admission caught everyone off guard. Several journalists exchanged glances, their pens hovering above notepads. Don't get me wrong, Trump continued, seeming to speak more to X than to the assembled adults. Building a business empire matters. Creating jobs matters. But at the end of the day, the moments I treasure most aren't the deal signings or the ribbon cuttings. They're the quiet conversations with my children, the wisdom I tried to pass on, the times I was there when they needed me, and the times I regret not being there. He placed a hand gently on X's shoulder. Remember that, young man. Success isn't worth much if you sacrifice everything else to achieve it. Balance is the hardest thing to find, and I didn't always find it. As they reached the end of the corridor, Elon's expression had softened noticeably. For all their differences in style, politics, and approach, a connection had formed through their shared understanding of the lonely weight of ambition and the universal truths of fatherhood. Success, Trump concluded, is ultimately about impact. Not just the buildings you leave behind, or the money in the bank, but how you change the lives around you. Did you make the world better? Did you lift others up along the way? Did you show courage when it mattered most? That's the measure that counts in the end. X nodded, his eyes wide with understanding. Thank you for telling me the truth, he said simply. Donald Trump, a man accustomed to commanding rooms and dominating conversations, found himself humbled by the simple wisdom and gratitude of a child. Thank you, he replied, for asking the right questions. The afternoon light slanted through the massive windows of the SpaceX facility as the tour reached one of Elon's favorite areas, the Mission Control Center. Rows of monitors displayed telemetry data, launch simulations, and orbital calculations. This was where dreams were transformed into flight paths, where abstract math became concrete achievement. This is where it all comes together, Elon explained, his usual reserve giving way to genuine enthusiasm. From here, we've controlled every launch, monitored every landing, managed every mission. Trump surveyed the room with appreciation. Reminds me of the NASA control rooms from when I was a kid, except more modern, sleeker. The principles are the same, Elon acknowledged, but we've tried to streamline, to remove unnecessary complexity. One of our core philosophies is that the best part is no part, the best process is no process. Smart, Trump nodded. Bureaucracy kills innovation faster than anything else. I found that in government more than anywhere. As engineers demonstrated the capabilities of their systems, X remained unusually quiet, observing the interactions with intense focus. Finally, as a brief lull fell over the conversation, the boy tugged gently on Trump's sleeve again. Mr. President, X said, his voice carrying in the momentary silence. What makes someone truly successful? Is it money, power, fame, or something else? The room stilled. Several engineers paused their demonstrations. Journalists leaned forward slightly, sensing another moment of unexpected candor approaching. Trump considered the question with surprising seriousness. He glanced at Elon, then back to X. That, he said finally, is probably the most important question anyone can ask, and the answer changes as you move through life. He gestured to the control room around them. When I was younger, success was simple. It was having the tallest building, the biggest deal, the most impressive portfolio. It was proving the doubters wrong. He paused, looking reflective. But as you get older, you start to see things differently. Trump moved to one of the large windows, overlooking the rocket assembly area below. X followed, standing beside him, waiting patiently for the rest of the answer. I've known many wealthy people who were miserable, Trump continued. I've known famous people who couldn't maintain a single meaningful relationship. I've known powerful people who were eaten alive by their own insecurities. He turned to X. True success, the kind that actually brings contentment, is about impact and legacy. It's about how many lives you've improved. It's about whether the world is better because you were in it. Elon had moved closer, listening with evident interest to Trump's perspective. Your father understands this, Trump said, gesturing toward Elon. He could have retired after PayPal. He had enough money to live luxuriously for the rest of his life. But he chose to risk it all on electric cars and rockets because he saw a bigger purpose, making humanity sustainable, making us multiplanetary. X looked up at his father with undisguised admiration. That's success at its highest level, Trump continued. Not just accumulating resources, but deploying them towards something meaningful, something that outlasts you. One of the SpaceX executives, a woman who had been with the company since its earliest days, stepped forward. That's what keeps many of us here through the hardest times. It's not just a job. It's a mission that matters. Trump nodded. The most fulfilled people I know aren't necessarily the richest or most famous. They're the ones who wake up with purpose, who know their work means something. He knelt to X's level once more. Here's what I've learned after decades of chasing success. If your only goal is money, no amount will ever be enough. If your goal is fame, you'll never feel truly seen. If your goal is power, you'll always fear losing it. X absorbed these words with remarkable intensity. But if your goal is to create something meaningful, to solve problems that matter, to leave a positive mark on the world, that's the success that brings peace. That's the success that lets you sleep well at night. Elon, normally guarded about his emotions, seemed moved by Trump's unexpected depth. That's something I've tried to teach my children. Success isn't about the applause. It's about advancing what's possible. Exactly, Trump agreed. The applause fades. The headlines change. What remains is the impact of your work and the relationships you've built. He straightened up, wincing slightly as his knees cracked. You know, when I was in the White House, I had moments of feeling like the most powerful person on earth. But power is fleeting. What matters more is whether you use that power for something worthwhile. X, processing this perspective with surprising maturity, asked, "How do you know if what you're doing is worthwhile?" Trump smiled at the philosophical depth of the question. That's the big one, isn't it? For me, it came down to a simple test. Will this make life better for American families? Will this create more opportunity, more prosperity, more security? If the answer was yes, it was worth fighting for. He looked at Elon. Your father asked different questions. Will this advance humanity's potential? Will this make us more sustainable? Will this expand our horizons? But the principle is the same. Impact beyond yourself. A NASA liaison who had joined the tour spoke up. That's what connected the original space program to the American public. It wasn't just about beating the Soviets. It was about expanding human potential, about proving what we could achieve together. Exactly, Trump nodded. The greatest achievements unite purpose with possibility. They're not just impressive, they're meaningful. He turned back to X. So, to answer your question directly, true success is using your unique talents and opportunities to leave the world better than you found it. It's creating value, solving problems, building something that serves others. X nodded solemnly, then asked, "Is that why you wanted to be president? To make things better?" The directness of the question momentarily caught Trump off guard. For a second, the political persona fell away completely, revealing something rarely seen in public, genuine reflection without calculation. "Yes," he said simply. "Whatever the critics said, whatever the media portrayed, that was always the core of it. I saw problems I believed I could solve. I saw potential going unrealized. I wanted America to be as great as I knew it could be." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever one's politics, it was hard to doubt the conviction in that moment. "Your father and I have different visions sometimes," Trump continued, glancing at Elon. "Different approaches, different priorities. But I believe we share that fundamental desire to push boundaries, to solve problems, to build something lasting." Elon nodded in acknowledgement. "Despite our differences, I've never doubted your patriotism or your conviction. We've just seen different paths to American greatness." "And that's how it should be," Trump replied. "A country of just one perspective would never innovate, never evolve, never reach its full potential." As they prepared to continue the tour, X looked between the two men, one who had shaped the physical and digital landscapes of America through business and politics, the other who was literally reshaping humanity's relationship with energy, transportation, and space. "Thank you," X said simply. "I think I understand better now." Trump placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're asking the right questions, young man. Keep doing that. Success will find you if you stay curious and courageous." As they moved toward the next section of the facility, several observers exchanged glances. They had expected a photo opportunity, perhaps some predictable platitudes about American innovation. Instead, they were witnessing something far more genuine, an unscripted exploration of what truly constitutes a successful life, prompted by the disarming curiosity of a child. And in the process, they were seeing new dimensions of two of the most scrutinized public figures of the modern era. Dimensions rarely glimpsed through the distorting lens of media coverage and political positioning. The tour had reached the heart of SpaceX's research division, where engineers worked on the next generation of propulsion systems that would eventually power missions to Mars and beyond. Massive whiteboards covered with complex equations lined the walls. Prototype components sat on workbenches, representing countless hours of iteration and refinement. Donald Trump moved through the space with genuine interest, occasionally asking surprisingly technical questions that revealed a deeper understanding of engineering principles than many had expected. Elon provided detailed explanations, his usual reticence giving way to the enthusiasm he always displayed when discussing the technical challenges of spaceflight. X remained close, absorbing every detail, occasionally asking his own questions that often bridged the technical discussions with the more philosophical conversation about success that had developed throughout the day. "This is where we're developing the Raptor engines for future Mars missions," Elon explained, gesturing toward a massive test apparatus. "Each one produces over 230 tons of thrust. We'll need around 30 of them for the Mars Colonial Transporter." "Incredible," Trump replied, studying the machinery with appreciation. "The scale of your ambition is something else, Elon. Most people would be content with revolutionizing the auto industry or creating reusable rockets. But you're already focused on making humanity multiplanetary." Elon nodded. "It's essential for our long-term survival. Earth is the only place in the known universe where consciousness exists. If something catastrophic happened, a massive asteroid impact, nuclear war, an engineered pandemic, consciousness as we know it could disappear forever. Becoming multiplanetary is like a backup drive for humanity. Trump considered this perspective thoughtfully. A backup drive for humanity. I like that. He turned to X. Your father thinks on a different time scale than most people. That's another aspect of success. Understanding which problems need solving right now and which needs someone to think decades or centuries ahead. X looked up at the former president. Do you think about problems that way too? For the long future? Something shifted in Trump's expression, a momentary vulnerability that few had ever witnessed in public. Not always, he admitted. In business and politics, the pressure often pushes you toward immediate results, toward the next quarter's earnings or the next election cycle. It's one of the hardest disciplines, maintaining that long view when everything around you demands immediate results. A senior engineer approached, holding a small component. Mr. Musk, we've completed the initial testing on the modified valve assembly. The efficiency improvements are even better than we projected. As Elon examined the component, Trump turned to X. You see that? That's success in action. Incremental improvements that add up to something revolutionary. Most people just see the finished rocket launching. They don't see the thousands of small victories that made it possible. X nodded thoughtfully. Like building blocks. Exactly, Trump affirmed. Success is rarely one big moment. It's thousands of small decisions, improvements, and perseverance through setbacks. As the group moved toward the final section of the tour, a gathering space had been prepared with refreshments for the distinguished guests. Team members from various SpaceX divisions mingled, creating an unexpectedly intimate atmosphere for what had begun as a formal visit. X, who had remained thoughtful since their last conversation, suddenly approached Trump with renewed purpose. Mr. President, he said, his voice clear despite the surrounding conversations. You've told me about what success means, but not how it feels. Does being successful make you happy? The room quieted as attention shifted to this unexpected question. Trump's expression softened as he considered his response. That, he said finally, might be the most important question you've asked yet. He glanced around, then gestured to a nearby seating area. Let's sit for a moment. As they settled into chairs, Trump seemed to be carefully considering his words. Elon joined them, equally interested in the former president's perspective on this profound question. Happiness and success, Trump began, aren't always the same thing. I've had moments of tremendous achievement, opening a new building, winning an election, closing a major deal that didn't bring lasting contentment. And I've had simple moments with family that contained more genuine happiness than any business victory. He leaned forward slightly. The truth is, success itself doesn't create happiness. What creates happiness is purpose, connection, and the knowledge that your life has meaning. Trump glanced at Elon. I suspect your father would agree. The satisfaction doesn't come from the accolades or the money. It comes from seeing your vision become reality, from solving problems that matter. Elon nodded. The external validation is fleeting. What lasts is knowing you've moved the needle on something important. X absorbed this exchange with remarkable focus. So success without purpose doesn't make you happy? Exactly, Trump confirmed. I've known many people who achieved everything they thought they wanted, wealth, fame, influence, only to discover a profound emptiness waiting for them at the summit. They climbed the mountain only to find the view wasn't what they'd imagined. He looked directly at X. The happiest successful people I know are those who align their ambitions with their deeper values. They didn't just chase achievement for its own sake. They pursued meaningful challenges that resonated with who they truly were. Elon, normally reserved about personal matters, added, There were times when both companies were failing, when we were weeks from bankruptcy, when critics were declaring us finished. Those were incredibly difficult periods. But there was also a clarity in those moments, a certainty that what we were trying to accomplish mattered enough to justify the struggle. Trump nodded in agreement. That's it exactly. The happiness doesn't come from the success itself. It comes from knowing the pursuit was worthwhile regardless of the outcome. X seemed to be processing these insights deeply. So it's about the journey, not just the destination. Yes, but with an important addition, Trump replied. It's about a journey worth taking, toward a destination worth reaching. Both matter. He gestured around the SpaceX facility. What your father has built here isn't just impressive because it's difficult. It's impressive because it's difficult in service of something profoundly important, expanding humanity's potential, creating a more sustainable future, opening the frontier of space to new possibilities. A SpaceX executive who had been listening nearby spoke up. That's what binds our team together through the challenges. We're not just building rockets, we're building humanity's future in space. Trump turned back to X. So, to answer your question directly, success alone doesn't guarantee happiness, but success in pursuit of something meaningful, something aligned with your deepest values, something that allows you to use your unique gifts to make a positive difference. That kind of success creates a foundation for genuine contentment. X nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom. Then, with the directness only a child could manage, he asked, "Are you happy, Mr. President?" The room fell completely silent. This wasn't a question Trump was typically asked, certainly not in public, and rarely with such innocent sincerity. For a moment, the former president seemed caught off guard, the carefully constructed public persona momentarily set aside. When he answered, there was a rawness to his voice that surprised everyone present. "I've experienced extraordinary success by conventional measures," he began slowly. "I've built buildings that change skylines. I've created thousands of jobs. I've held the highest office in the land. But happiness," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "happiness has been more elusive at times." He looked directly at X. "The moments I've felt most fulfilled weren't always the obvious triumphs. They were watching my children grow into capable adults. They were seeing projects revitalize struggling communities. They were the quiet moments when I knew I'd made the right decision for the right reasons, regardless of the political cost." Trump glanced at Elon. "Your father might understand this better than most. When you're driven to achieve on a large scale, there's rarely a finishing line where you can finally rest. There's always the next challenge, the next frontier, the next problem to solve." He turned back to X. "The trick, and I'm still learning this, is to find joy in the pursuit itself, to celebrate the progress without being consumed by the endless striving, to remember that the relationships you build along the way matter as much as the goals you accomplish." A photographer captured this moment. The former president, the tech visionary, and the thoughtful child engaged in conversation about life's most fundamental questions. It wasn't the photo op anyone had anticipated, but it was unquestionably more meaningful. "Thank you for being honest," X said simply. "Most grown-ups don't talk about these things." Trump smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his features. "Most grown-ups don't ask such important questions." As the afternoon deepened, the formal structure of the tour had gradually dissolved. What had begun as a carefully orchestrated visit had transformed into something far more authentic. Secret Service agents maintained their vigilant perimeter, but within that protected space, something remarkable was happening. A genuine exchange between individuals typically separated by political divides, media narratives, and public personas. The SpaceX cafeteria had been cleared for a small reception. Engineers mingled with political staffers. Journalists conversed with rocket scientists. At the center of it all, an unlikely trio continued their conversation: Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and young X, whose profound questions had repeatedly shifted the day's trajectory toward unexpected territory. "Your son has quite a mind," Trump remarked to Elon as they accepted cups of coffee from an attendant. The questions he asks, they cut right to the heart of things. Elon nodded, a hint of pride visible beneath his typically reserved expression. He's always been that way, sees patterns adults miss, bypasses the surface to reach the core issues. X, sipping a small glass of lemonade, had been quiet for several minutes, seemingly processing everything he'd heard throughout the day. When he finally spoke again, his question carried the weight of careful consideration. "Mr. President," he began, drawing Trump's immediate attention, "you said earlier that success without meaning doesn't bring happiness. But how do you know what's meaningful? How do you choose the right mountain to climb?" Trump's expression softened as he considered this profound inquiry. He glanced at Elon, then back to X. "That," he said, "might be the most important question of all. And the answer isn't simple." He settled into a nearby chair, inviting X to join him. Elon followed, equally interested in Trump's perspective on this fundamental life question. "When I was young," Trump began, "meaning was straightforward. Building bigger, achieving more, proving the doubters wrong. I wanted to reshape the New York skyline, to create properties that would stand for generations, to make a mark that couldn't be ignored." He paused, looking reflective. "Those weren't bad goals. Creation matters, building matters. But as I got older, I began to realize there were deeper layers to meaning than just achievement." Several nearby conversations quieted as people tuned into this unexpectedly philosophical discussion. "I think," Trump continued thoughtfully, "meaning comes from three main sources. First, from using your unique talents and abilities, doing what you're naturally suited to do. Second, from creating value for others, making lives better in some tangible way. And third, from building connections and relationships that matter." He looked directly at X. "The most meaningful pursuits combine all three. Your father's work is a perfect example. He's using his extraordinary engineering and business talents. He's creating value through sustainable energy and advancing space exploration. And he's built teams of brilliant people working together toward these goals." Elon, typically uncomfortable with praise, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "But here's the complicated part," Trump added, leaning forward. "Finding meaning isn't a one-time decision. It evolves throughout your life. What feels meaningful at 20 may not feel the same at 50 or 70. X absorbed this perspective with remarkable focus. "So you have to keep asking yourself what matters?" "Exactly," Trump confirmed. "The question, 'What mountain should I climb?' needs regular revisiting. Otherwise, you might spend years scaling a peak only to discover it wasn't the one that truly mattered to you." A senior SpaceX engineer who had been listening nearby spoke up. "That resonates with me. I spent a decade at a prestigious firm, doing work that looked impressive on paper, but left me feeling empty. Coming here meant a pay cut initially, but the meaning of the mission made it worthwhile." Trump nodded. "I've seen that countless times. People chase what society defines as success, only to discover it doesn't resonate with their deepest values." He turned back to X. "The key is honest self-reflection. What truly matters to you, not to your parents, your teachers, your friends, or society, but to you? What problems do you feel compelled to solve? What contributions do you feel uniquely positioned to make?" X considered this thoughtfully. "How do you know if you're being honest with yourself?" Trump smiled at the wisdom embedded in this follow-up question. "That's the hardest part. We're all masters of self-deception. But there are clues. Pay attention to what energizes you versus what depletes you. Notice where your mind naturally wanders when it's free. Observe what makes you lose track of time." He gestured toward Elon. "Your father is famous for his intense work ethic, for pushing himself and his teams beyond conventional limits. But that's sustainable because the work itself is inherently energizing for him. It's aligned with his deeper purpose. Elon nodded. The external motivation, recognition, compensation, status, those are secondary. They can't sustain you through the inevitable hardships. Only intrinsic motivation, genuine belief in the importance of the work itself, can do that. Trump leaned back slightly. In the White House, I learned this lesson profoundly. The presidency tests you in ways nothing else can. The criticism is relentless, the pressure immense, the problems often seemingly unsolvable. External validation disappears for long stretches. The only thing that sustains you is the deep conviction that the work matters, that the struggle serves a purpose larger than yourself. He looked directly at X. So, to answer your question about choosing the right mountain, listen to your internal compass, not external expectations. Pursue challenges that utilize your unique strengths. Choose work that creates value for others. Build meaningful connections along the way. And be willing to recalibrate your course as you grow and evolve. X nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom. And here's one more thing, Trump added, his voice softening further. Don't be afraid of the valleys between the mountains. Some of life's most important discoveries happen in those transitional spaces. When you're between major pursuits, reassessing and reorienting yourself. A momentary vulnerability crossed his features. I wish someone had told me that earlier in life. I viewed any pause or recalibration as weakness, as failure. Now I understand those moments are essential for authentic growth. This admission, this glimpse of regret from a man known for projecting unwavering confidence, created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Even Trump's own staff seemed surprised by this level of candor. Elon, normally reserved about his own vulnerabilities, added unexpectedly, I've made similar mistakes, pushed forward relentlessly, sometimes at great personal cost. There's wisdom in knowing when to press ahead and when to step back and reassess. X looked between these two extraordinary men, both titans in their respective fields, both known for their relentless drive and ambition, and saw something few others ever witnessed. The human complexity behind the public personas, the hard-earned wisdom that came from both triumphs and missteps. Thank you, X said simply, for telling me the truth, for not treating me like just a kid. Trump smiled, genuine warmth lighting his features. The best conversations often happen when we drop our pretenses. When we speak honestly, without the filters we usually maintain. He glanced around at the gathered crowd, many of whom had been quietly listening to this exchange. That's another secret to both success and happiness. Authentic connection. Not networking, not transactional relationships, but genuine human connection based on honesty and mutual respect. A SpaceX executive who had been listening nearby nodded in agreement. That's something we've tried to cultivate here, despite the pressure and pace. Technical excellence matters enormously, but so does human connection. As the reception continued, something had fundamentally shifted. The expected political posturing had given way to something more genuine. The carefully maintained public images had softened, revealing the complex human beings behind the headlines. And at the center of it all was a remarkably perceptive child, whose straightforward questions had created space for unexpected authenticity. As they prepared to move toward the final portion of the visit, X approached Trump once more. Mr. President, he said quietly, thank you for answering my questions. I've learned a lot today. Trump knelt down to the boy's level one final time. Thank you for asking them. Sometimes it takes a child's perspective to remind us of what truly matters. He glanced up at Elon. You know, we've had our differences over the years. Political disagreements, different approaches, occasionally sharp words. But I've always respected your vision, your determination, your willingness to bet everything on ideas other people dismissed as impossible. Elon nodded in acknowledgement. Likewise, Despite our differences, I've always appreciated your resilience, your ability to weather storms that would have broken most people. Something passed between these two controversial visionaries, a moment of mutual recognition that transcended their public disagreements. And bearing witness to this unexpected connection was a child whose curiosity had created the space for genuine dialogue. The photographers captured this tableau, Trump kneeling to X's level, Elon standing nearby, the massive rocket components visible in the background. It wasn't the photo op anyone had anticipated, but it contained something far more valuable, a glimpse of authentic human connection, bridging the divides that so often separate us. As the visit drew to a close, the SpaceX team had prepared one final stop, a panoramic viewing platform overlooking the launch facility where gleaming starships stood in various stages of completion. The setting Texas sun bathed everything in golden light, creating an almost mythic quality to the scene. These massive vessels that represented humanity's reach toward the stars. Donald Trump stood at the railing, taking in the view with evident appreciation. Elon stood nearby, pointing out specific features of the launch complex. And between them, X gazed at the rockets with the pure wonder that only children can fully access. A reminder of why the work of exploration matters in the first place. "You know," Trump said, his voice carrying in the evening air, "this is what America is all about. Daring to dream beyond current limitations. Building what others declare impossible. Pushing boundaries that most accept as fixed." He gestured toward the massive starships. These aren't just rockets. They're physical manifestations of human potential, of what we can accomplish when we refuse to accept conventional limitations. Elon nodded in agreement. "That's precisely why I started SpaceX, to expand the boundaries of possibility, to ensure humanity becomes multiplanetary before some catastrophe makes that impossible." X, who had been quietly observing the rockets, turned to Trump. "Mr. President," he asked, "what would you tell kids my age about success? What should we know that most grown-ups don't tell us?" Trump seemed momentarily surprised by this final question. He glanced at Elon, then back to X, clearly giving the matter serious thought. "That's a big question," he said finally. "If I could go back and tell my younger self what I know now, what would it be?" He looked out at the rockets again, as if drawing inspiration from their ambitious reach. "I would say this," Trump began, his voice gentler than his typical public cadence. "First, understand that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the journey toward success. Every person who's ever built anything worthwhile has failed repeatedly along the way. What matters isn't avoiding failure, but how quickly you learn from it and try again." Several SpaceX engineers nodded in agreement, intimately familiar with the company's early failures and subsequent triumphs. "Second," Trump continued, "don't confuse acclaim with achievement. Some of your most important work will happen when nobody's watching, when there's no audience to applaud. The foundation of every visible success is built through thousands of invisible efforts." He glanced at Elon. "Your father understands this better than most. Long before the successful launches and the magazine covers, there were countless hours of problem solving that nobody witnessed or celebrated." X nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom. "Third," Trump said, "be careful about what you sacrifice in pursuit of your goals. Success that costs you your health, your key relationships, or your integrity isn't success at all. It's a decorated form of failure." Something changed in Trump's expression, a vulnerability rarely glimpsed by the public. "I've seen too many people, myself included at times, sacrifice what matters most for achievements that ultimately feel hollow. The trophy matters less than the people you hope to share it with." Elon, typically reserved about personal matters, added quietly, "That's something I've had to learn the hard way as well. Balance isn't just a nice to have. It's essential for sustainable achievement and genuine fulfillment." Trump nodded in agreement before continuing. Fourth, remember that character is destiny. In a world obsessed with metrics and measurements, with followers and likes, with wealth and status, character can seem outdated or irrelevant. But in the long run, who you are matters more than what you achieve. He looked directly at X. Integrity, courage, persistence, compassion, gratitude. These qualities determine not just what you'll accomplish, but what your accomplishments will mean, both to you and to others. A SpaceX executive who had been quietly listening spoke up. That aligns with how we try to build our culture here. Technical brilliance matters enormously, but character matters just as much. The hardest challenges require both. Trump acknowledged this with a nod before turning back to X. Finally, he said, never stop asking the questions you've asked today. About meaning, about purpose, about what constitutes a life well lived. Most adults stop asking these questions as they get caught in the currents of career and responsibility. But these are the questions that matter most. He gestured toward the stunning vista before them, the rockets silhouetted against the deepening twilight, the vast Texas landscape stretching towards the horizon. All of this impressive technology, all of this remarkable achievement, ultimately serves human flourishing. Never lose sight of that larger purpose. X absorbed these final insights with remarkable focus. Thank you, he said simply. I'll remember. Trump smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his features. I have no doubt you will. You have an extraordinary mind, and just as importantly, an extraordinary heart. Those who can bring both intelligence and compassion to their pursuits change the world in ways that endure. As the visit concluded and the formal goodbyes began, something unexpected happened. Donald Trump, a man known for his dominant handshakes and commanding presence, knelt down one final time to X's level. Thank you for your questions today, he said quietly. You reminded me of some truths I sometimes forget in the noise and hurry of public life. X nodded solemnly. Sometimes kids can see things grown-ups miss. Trump smiled. That's wisdom right there. Never lose that clarity of perception. It's a rare and valuable gift. As Trump rose and prepared to depart, several observers exchanged glances. They had witnessed something unexpected, moments of genuine connection and authenticity that transcended the usual political and media narratives. The journalists present faced an interesting dilemma. They had come expecting a straightforward story about two controversial figures with a complex history. Instead, they had witnessed something far more nuanced and human, a conversation across divides, prompted by a child's disarming curiosity. As Trump's motorcade departed and the SpaceX team began dispersing, Elon placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You asked some important questions today. X looked up at his father. He answered them honestly, not like adults usually do. Elon nodded. That's rare in public figures. The protective layers become so thick over time that authenticity becomes difficult to access. He seems sad sometimes, X observed, even though he's successful. Success is complicated, Elon replied. It solves some problems and creates others. It opens some doors and closes others. That's something most people don't understand until they've experienced it. Later that evening, as video clips from the visit began circulating online, something unexpected happened. In a media environment typically dominated by division and outrage, these glimpses of authentic connection resonated deeply. The image of Trump kneeling to answer X's profound questions about success and meaning cut through the usual noise. Comment sections filled with reflections rather than arguments. People shared their own perspectives on what constitutes true success, on the relationship between achievement and fulfillment, on the wisdom that can emerge from unexpected sources. For a brief moment, public discourse shifted from its usual combative stance towards something more contemplative. The questions that X had asked about the true nature of success, about the relationship between achievement and happiness, about how to choose meaningful challenges, were questions that resonated across political and cultural divides. In newsrooms and social media companies, editors and algorithms that typically amplified conflict found themselves promoting content that invited reflection instead. The narrative wasn't about winners and losers, about political points scored or partisan divides reinforced. It was about universal human questions that transcend our differences. In a time of deep polarization, this unexpected moment of authentic connection, triggered by a child's straightforward curiosity, offered a glimpse of what public discourse could be when stripped of posturing and pretense. Donald Trump, boarding Air Force One, found himself unusually reflective as he reviewed the day's events. The expected photo opportunity had become something far more meaningful, a reminder of the universal questions that underlie our human journey, regardless of political affiliation or public persona. And at SpaceX, as Elon tucked his son into bed that night, X asked one final question. "Dad, do you think what we did today mattered?" Elon considered this thoughtfully. "Yes," he said finally. Sometimes the most important connections happen when we set aside our preconceptions and speak honestly with each other. Today was one of those rare moments. X nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "Good," he said simply. "That's success too, isn't it? Making moments that matter." Elon smiled. "That might be the most important kind of success of all." And as the story continued to resonate across an often divided nation, many found themselves asking the same questions X had posed, about the true nature of success, about the path to genuine fulfillment, about what constitutes a life well lived. In a cynical age, this unexpected moment of authenticity offered something increasingly rare, a reminder that beneath our public personas and political divisions, we share the same fundamental human questions about purpose, meaning, and connection. And sometimes it takes a child's straightforward curiosity to bring those universal questions back into focus. In a world often divided by politics and perspectives, it's the simple questions that unite us. Today, we witness something remarkable: how a child's curiosity broke through the barriers that typically separate us. What is true success? How do we find meaning in our achievements? How do we balance ambition with what truly matters? These aren't Republican or Democratic questions. They're human questions. Take a moment to reflect. What mountains are you climbing in your own life? Are they the ones that truly matter to you? What would you tell your younger self about success and fulfillment if you could? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time when someone's wisdom about success changed your perspective, or when a child's question made you see the world differently. And if this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder about what truly constitutes a life well lived. Because in our divided times, these moments of authentic connection, these glimpses of our shared humanity, matter more than ever.